Another draft physics video presentation. So I'm apparently have been debunked by this character, finger, down there. He's really gone to a lot of effort to make his arguments and his proofs, to present them in some sort of straight-up scientific manner. How he's going to debunk something. I've already responded to the vague accusation that you cannot make a counter-contention to any theory, okay, like God. Somebody could say there is a God. Until I prove there's no God, I can't say, no, that's wrong. And if I provide another theory that suits the evidence, fits it perfectly, or at least as good as the previous theory, with just as much correlation, and it's simpler, and it's mechanical, and it doesn't require any ESP or magical bent somethings or ambiguous somethings in the first place. Something ambiguous did it. So it has less ambiguity, it's more concise, more direct, simpler by a long shot, and it is universal. That is, the same mechanism fits for every explanation. The same mechanism explains thunder and lightning, explains why there's diversity in the animal kingdom. It's an evolution theory, a mechanical theory that explains why things are the way they are. Now he says doing that isn't winning. That's not how science works. Science doesn't like more complete, simpler answers. And it is proven somehow that more complete, simpler explanations have a very low probability of being correct. When, no, the exact opposite has been demonstrated over time. So anyway, he's just a horrible liar. He's debunked nothing. He's explained nothing. He's said nothing. It's just empty words.
At YouTube to another live stream and video recording for afterwards.
All right, probably need more volume. Should check that ahead of time, Gary. Well, whatever. Such is life. Mistakes are made.
So, early morning, just woke up. Only time I really had a chance to get a video out because I'm so busy lately.
All right, you can't even turn on the light. Oh, okay. Yeah, so busy. Can't even turn. I don't even have time to turn the light on.
And we're just gonna review some of the stuff we've been talking about recently. So,
some of the crap you just made up. The fake facts.
Basically, the two subjects in the title are just really unproductive forms of antinatalism that have been occurring.
Well, whatever. So physics is antinatalism. Again, you can't even separate these subjects. You don't even have enough scientific logic skills to recognize it's really not a great idea to mix subjects together that are completely different subjects.
Here for multiple years now, both in the form of a person putting forward, it can be summarized so quickly, we're only 45 seconds into this video, and
yes, 45 seconds of more wasted time for your poor audience who learns nothing.
Person in mention puts forward physics that he says contradicts. Start out with the physics one because that's the first thing.
It's in opposition to. Now, what do you mean by contradict? Do you mean evolution contradicts God? Well, I'd say it's an opposing theory is what I would call it. It's a theory that says, yes, you don't need a God. Obviously, the theory of physics does not prove there is no God. It would like to, but just can't do that.
What's word physics?
I mean, that requires a different kind of argument. The argument from it's a made-up story. Now, that's not going to be scientific facts that are going to make that clear or unclear. I mean, that's already kind of a clear story. The history of the Bible is a clear story. So we already know it's just a made-up story. Now, whether God told it to the men who made it up, well, believe it if you want, but science can't prove God didn't tell them.
That he says is true, okay? And in order for something to be true,
I said it's a better theory. So again, he doesn't have any video where I said the words, it is true. I'm arguing from logic. I'm saying it's a better explanation for the phenomenon. A much, much better, universal. That is, it answers all the questions. It's a unifying theory. and it's mechanical instead of full of a bunch of ambiguously defined magical forces, a bunch of invisible dark matter men. Doesn't have any of those. Doesn't have any entangled ESP particles. Doesn't rely on any superluminal communication. Do you believe in all those things, by the way? Do you believe they've proven that particles superluminally communicate with each other?
Has to, you know, typically it has to contradict the thing that is already being put forward as true.
Yes, I'm contradicting their theory. I'm pointing out how their theory is fundamentally flawed and religious. It's a bunch of made-up invisible force men, okay, magical powers given to nothing. Absolute nothing has power to tell matter where to go. It's a non-mechanical, non-physical physics explanation. Yes, it's really dumb even. I'll go that far. Their theory is really dumb. It's so fucking religious.
Right. So he's saying that it's true and that the modern physics is false.
Yes, their understanding, their explanation for why, let's say, some phenomena happens. So here, let's go to one of the specifics. Okay, this is part of what physics requires you to do, or being a theoretician. It requires you to explain different phenomena and explain how your theory is better than their theory. And so, why don't you tell me which one you like better, okay, as a theory? Because there's only a little pile of evidence, right? There's a slit experiment. Now, their theory is, well, one guy says a photon goes through and a new universe is created, okay, for each possible path the photon could take. So, there's a new universe. We happen to be in the one that goes here, but there's a new universe for every single other possibility in the sense of what this thing they say can do. They say it can go here, and they say it can go there, and there's almost an infinite number of places it can go. And so they say an infinite number, essentially almost an infinite number of new universes created every time a photon goes through a slit. That's one theory. Now, I'd say that one's on its face is just so crazy that nobody could fall for that crap. Come on, no one's that stupid. So another theory is that the photon goes through, okay, and it doesn't matter where it goes through. Now, we know photons have a certain size. You know, they have a polarization, okay? That means there's a certain width to their function. They spread a certain amount, and that's one of their characteristics. And this thing goes through a slit. Now, their argument is that the Feynman style kind of argument is it doesn't matter where it goes through the slit. So unlike a water molecule, you know, where the ones that go through the middle go fast and the ones that go by the edge end up moving slower, and that's why you get a wave. See, first off, their theory is, do you believe this part? It doesn't make a wave like that. It makes two waves. Not for any good reason, okay, just because they made it up. They said, look, there's a point in the middle. I'm going to put a brick there. Now I have two waves. So they have no explanation for how the two waves are created at all, and why it's different than water in this one case. They like to say it's just like water. Photons act just like water waves. Well, they only act like water waves in one instant. That is when you have two slits. And they really don't act like water waves because in photons there's actually two patterns. But see, these are all details you have to pay some attention to. See, they have a whole story, and you're not paying any attention to the story's comparison. My story versus their story. And the story is based on the same evidence. Okay, so anyway, back to Feynman. So Feynman's explanation is, oh, this is too complicated. It's all random anyway. So it doesn't matter whether the photon goes here or it goes straight through the middle. That's their theory. That these photons that go over here, more on this side, they have the same likelihood of doing this as this photon has. So it doesn't matter where it goes through, the same exact possibilities exist. Now, even though we know that doesn't happen in water, no way, that's their theory. That it's all random here. Here there's random. Photon really wasn't in a position, really didn't do a certain thing. Every single photon, no matter where it goes through this slit, behaves exactly the same probabilities. So it doesn't matter whether it's right next to it or not next to it. So it's almost like me saying a roulette wheel, right? If I don't spin the wheel and I just throw the ball, I'll get the same probabilities of outcome without spinning the wheel, that the wheel is somehow superfluous to the outcome. Now, logically, I'm saying that's nonsense. And most people know it would be nonsense. Why do they spin the wheel then? Why did they make the wheel spinnable if it doesn't make any difference? Clearly makes a difference. All right, so so I'm proposing that there's things called electrons on surfaces, and just as they diffract light on a surface, that is, just like the surface of water, for example, will deflect the light, okay, the same process is happening here. The closer the photons, the elements of the photons are, that is, the more bits of electron they hit in trying to get through these slits, the more likely they are to deflect. So they have to hit an electron to actually have their path changed. They're not magically changing. They're not changing because they will to change. That's their argument. That, see, the third argument is that when the photons go through here, they somehow magically know they have to split into two things called the wave function, probability function, and that they have to interfere with each other, and then they have to decide to go to one place. That they're very enabled, these little photons. These photons have all kinds of battleship enablement. They have radar, they can tell where they are in space, where the other bits are, and they make all these calculations and do extraordinarily complex math to figure out this is where I want to go today. Because I went here yesterday, and I went here the day before, so I have to go here because that's probabilistic. So that's their wacky theory. Now I've provided a simple explanation, a mechanical explanation. The photon's made of quanta, elements. The elements have a separation, and some of the elements hit electrons and get deflected. And on certain locations, you can put an element of a photon that went over here, and you can put an element that went in through here, and both of those elements will end up in the same location at the right frequency, and they will reconstruct a photon. Now, that's my simpler explanation for the phenomenon. And what I'm arguing is I can do that for every single thing we see. I can explain how a tree falls. I can explain how the clouds produce lightning. I can explain every single experiment, every single phenomenon with this simple mechanical explanation. This evolution theory is so much better than their religious theory. That's the argument, which I've already made, and which he hasn't debunked a single element of. My alternative theory, he hasn't explained how it doesn't fit the evidence, how it doesn't pass the test of explaining experimental outcomes. It does explain them, and it explains them with a simpler mechanism. It doesn't have wooey and nonsensical axioms built into it, as if it doesn't matter where the photon goes through. I mean, there's absolutely nowhere in our reality where it doesn't matter where it hits or what it's interacting with. It always matters where. All right.
And then he doesn't have a test.
Okay, so the test is the experiments. Now, I've already said this, at least 2 or 3 times in response to this accusation. The only test there is the evidence, the experiments. There's only one set of experiments. We both have to pass the same test. Now, the overtly obvious argument is they fail the test right from the beginning because they're explaining the big universe with bent space, and they're explaining the small universe with quantum theory. And the two are completely incompatible as momentum exchange mechanisms. They have nothing in common. You can't make bent space make an atom. You can't cause charge or do any of these phenomenon. Make light deflect when it goes through a slit. Bent space doesn't work, and vice versa. Gravitational movement in the universe can't be explained with virtual photons. I say it could if they understood what virtual photons really are, which is just pressure. Gravity is pressure. So I explain all that. So my one theory of pressure caused by little bits, little quanta, photon-like quanta, because they all move the same speed. Did you know that? Did you know all the forces move at the same speed, which is kind of evidence, that they're probably the same thing? Yeah, probably. You could probably find that on Earth, right? That there's a huge correlation for things running the same speed being the same species. Anyway.
To test the claim.
Okay, so again, that's all the channel is devoted to, is showing the tests and showing how the rational theory suits the experimental test. It explains the phenomenon without magical invented universes and dark matter and dark energy and entanglement and what else? Superluminal. They don't think two spontaneous events are actually spontaneous. All I have to do is look at them from a different perspective, and somehow I stop them from being spontaneous. They believe kind of crap like that. They don't think there's anything called an absolute velocity in the universe. Like there's no place you could just stick something in the universe that wasn't moving, and you couldn't watch the rest of the universe move around it. They don't think there's anything called a real velocity. Is that what you believe? Do you believe the evidence proves that there's no such thing as an absolute velocity? Do you think there's proof of it somewhere? Huh? I mean, you're so despicable. You have no knowledge of this subject, and yet you're going to decide who wins and who fails. You're a judge. You've heard no evidence. You've evaluated neither of the lawyer's arguments in any way. You've just said, I discredit that lawyer. He can't possibly make a correct argument because I don't like him. I mean, you are insipidly evil. I mean, you're so stupid.
So the claim doesn't have a test, so it's untestable, it's unfalsifiable.
So it's a lie. It's just as falsifiable as their claims. They have claimed that gravity affects photons twice as much. The simple argument is they have absolutely no experiment proving that. They have the slightest of indications of poorly done experiments, like the Eddington experiment done 100 years ago, never repeated with commensurate technology. So there's a 100-year-old experiment. They got Einstein in the New York Times, the first reference to Einstein in the New York Times, no doubt. And hero, he did it. That was the claim. Do you think they've proven the claim? Do you think the evidence is good enough to say they've resolved the question, they've answered it quite completely? Do you even know what the evidence is? No, you don't. And yet you're declaring it. You're telling us we should believe. You're telling your viewers, believe the religion, because no one proved it wasn't right, and no alternative theory was presented that meets the evidence, when that's just an overt lie. My theory does satisfy the test. It does pass the test. You're lying that it didn't. You haven't demonstrated one test it didn't successfully pass. You're a fucking despicable liar. Excuse my fucking French.
So nothing that he's saying contradicts modern physics, but he's...
Yes, everything I'm saying contradicts their theory of physics. Yes, their theory of physics is just a rubbish, wooey, we wish it to be so, we hope it's so theory. It has nothing to do with reality. It's like getting it as wrong as like some biologist actually thought that, the portion of our DNA that is passed on from the female was in some way evolving. And there's, and it only breaks. So breaking is not evolving. So yes, you can deteriorate something. You can flatten a tire. You can't make the tire better. You can only make the tire worse. And because they could make tires flatter, they thought it was actually evolving. Really because it was some change. Like all change is good change somehow in their brain. See, it's these little errors like that are just so critical. And they've made a ton of them. That's the accusation. And you counter that accusation with what? I believe them, and I don't like him. That's all you've got. You're such a petty, insincere, incredibly, you lack no integrity.
Putting it forward as though it's the truth and that it contradicts modern physics.
Well, it obviously contradicts modern physics. I claim there's one universe, the little one, and the rules in that little universe, everything else emerges out of those simple rules. It's contradicting their theory, yes. Overtly. There's no such thing as bent space and quantum mechanics. That's nonsense. There's one mechanism controlling everything. There's one particle theory that's true.
It's just totally ridiculous.
It's ridiculous that you get away with this, that there aren't enough credible human beings on this planet by percentage to say you're making completely unevidenced claims, you're not arguing any of the evidence, you're not arguing any of the specifics, you're not quoting anybody saying anything, and yet you're claiming someone's right or wrong. And you've judged none of the evidence.
And it doesn't have a test that contradicts modern physics. And there are...
So again, the argument is there's only one set of evidence. I've just explained. There's evidence. This is the experiment. I've explained to you exactly what their theories are. Okay, they probably have a few others. Now, the very fact that the physicists don't even agree on their own theory, that is, they don't have a theory. You know, they have 1/3 of the physics thinks a bunch of universes are created. 1/3 of the physicists think photons are magically enabled. And 1/3 thinks random is just something the universe does. It just poofs a lot of random stuff. Random. Okay, it doesn't care about where you really are and what you're really doing. It just all of a sudden says you're going to go left, whether you like it or not. Those are their theories. And they're not the same theory. Their own theory isn't one theory. It's a bunch of competing religious theories, interpretations they call them. And so you're saying they're right to have 3 answers to the question. I'm wrong to have one answer that's simpler and fits the evidence. And you know I'm wrong. You've proven I'm wrong by saying I'm wrong, right? You don't have to do anything else. You just have to say I'm wrong, and somehow I didn't do something I obviously did, which is explain it. You know.
Hundreds of tests, for all of these things, for general relativity, special relativity, etc.
Right. I've gone through the test page on general relativity. They're not proving relativity in those tests, They're just proving whether clocks break when you speed them up, or whether there's light deflected or diffracted by falling close to... Hold on a second. All right, I should be back. Better check for sure. So again, I can't keep re-emphasizing it, but there's only one set of tests. And you have no evidence that I haven't passed any of those tests, that I haven't explained how things work. And on relativity, if you go through their tests, those tests have nothing to do with proving there's a time dimension or proving that space is in any way bent or that nothing tells things where to go, or that there's an ether, which they're sort of claiming, some sort of ether that has no consequence. So like dark matter, it does one thing and does nothing else. Very magical solutions. So in what way so you're saying it's credible for them to say they've proven the fact that there's bent space and that there's a time dimension because there's evidence that velocity breaks clocks, when we could already deduce that certain clocks will be broken in all kinds of different ways. I don't have to do very much to break a sand dial, for example. Just turn it sideways and it doesn't tell very good time. Just blow on it a little too hard. So do you think that proves there's a time dimension because there's evidence that clocks break, that mechanisms change when you give them velocity, just like even human beings change when you give them velocity? There's already evidence of that we physically change. It's not very good for you, technically. So I'm just saying the tests are nothing. The tests are experiments dealing with light scattering around the corona of heavy objects, which is no surprise, and the fact that different clocks, atomic clocks generally speaking, that the capacity to degrade an atom, that is, force it to deteriorate and fall into its smaller constituents, is delayed by giving something velocity. That's all they've demonstrated. And you're claiming that, no, they did something else, that there's all kinds of evidence. Again, there's just experiments. And the experiments can be explained. Now, why don't you just tell me? I mean, maybe you have a theory. How exactly, if you were looking at, say, a sun bending light, how exactly you'd create a test that could differentiate between light that was bent by scatter and light that was bent by gravity? How exactly, after the fact, just by how the light lands, could you prove the difference between scatter and gravitational bending? Just analyzing the photons you receive, how could you tell the difference? Is there any test for that? I don't think there is. I don't think you could ever provide one.
And you don't even have to talk about, but that's neither here nor there. He doesn't have a test that challenges these things.
Yes, I'm challenging them with each of these explanations I'm providing. When I point out that there's no such thing as a half-silvered mirror producing equal beams of light, I've pointed out how there's no theoretical way out of that conclusion. It's impossible for their theory to be correct. And I've illustrated and pointed it out. It's impossible for their theory to be correct. It doesn't fit. Okay? There's no way they can believe one thing and state it as a fact and then assert this second thing. There's no way they can say, well, a slit causes this diffraction thing to happen, but it doesn't happen when it's half silver on a mirror. Somehow this slit rule doesn't apply anymore. They have no theory to explain why it would apply in every other circumstance on Earth, but somehow it wouldn't apply when they put this silvering on the mirror. That somehow silvering a mirror, they don't have to obey that physics anymore. You can't explain that. You can't explain how they're right and I'm wrong in that case. It's a plain argument and you're just ignoring it. Because you have no credibility and no integrity. You're just a liar.
So that's just complete nonsense. It's not science. He's not performing science.
Yeah, I am. The science is collecting evidence and demonstrating what it indicates. Okay, what you can model and explain as function. That's the process of science. Now, great scientists had some wacky theories, right? I mean, Newton believed in angels and really thought they had a role to play. And Faraday, although quite brilliant, had a whole gear. He thought there was a bunch of gears spinning inside of all these objects and blah, 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 blah. Not a very viable theory. So lots of people have theories and they're just wrong. And they can be demonstrated to be wrong because, yeah, they only work in one circumstance and you can't move them to all these other circumstances to say, does the theory work? See, like Feynman's theory of randomness fails when I put a bunch of little slits together. When I put a bunch of little slits together, this diffraction isn't random anymore because photons end up creating an image of what goes in, out. And you see, you can't, if you randomize the path of the photons, you can't recreate the image. Images are destroyed by randomizing the pixels. Very simple argument, kind of pointing out how at least one of those interpretations can't be correct. But you don't care about these facts.
He's not performing a hypothesis that can be tested with evidence.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. I have a hypothesis. I've presented it as an explanation. I pointed out in the radar experiment, the two-slit radar experiment, that jamming has exactly the same mathematical result. You can do exactly this. You can use the jamming explanation and you'll use exactly the same math, exactly the same structure. Everything will be exactly the same and you'll get exactly the same outcome. So you can have a choice. You say that photons magically talk to each other and decide to go somewhere, or you can have the simple explanation that no, our receivers require a frequency at a certain, a certain amount, and the fact is that if you send two signals to the receiver at the same time, it can't differentiate from them. It can't tell one from the other, and therefore it can't resolve either one.
So he doesn't have a test to test.
All of these videos are explaining how my theory passes the test and are explaining how their theory doesn't pass the test. See, I couldn't even draw their theory because I can't make any sense of it, right? I can just put an object here and an object here and I can say this bented space somehow and time and magically told this other object it has to go there. I can't draw a picture of it because it's impossible to draw a picture of because it doesn't have any mechanical functions. It's God. God done it. Okay, God person, I could take his arm off, and then I could explain, well, God says his arm just grows back. We never see that, actually, but, that's theoretically what God could do. I could draw a picture of it, but it wouldn't make any sense.
The physical reality, so it can be dismissed like you would dismiss anything else as ridiculous as that claim. So what did that?
So again, there's nothing about the claims that haven't been supported by evidence. There's no videos where I just say it happens this way and I don't explain why, what reasoning you would use, what reasoning you would apply to understand. Like I just pointed out with the light reflection here, that we know surfaces bend light. There's every likelihood that if you pass light past the side of a surface, that you're likely to experience some of the same physical phenomenon that bent light in the other case. So it makes perfectly good sense. I've tied the ends together. I've made a good little knot of truth, and you haven't in any way unraveled it in any way whatsoever. You've just slandered it. That's it. You're just sitting here lying.
Take 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes to go through. So it's not true, it's not false, it's just unfalsifiable.
So it's no more or less unfalsifiable than their theory. And as stated, they already have more than one theory. They don't even falsify each other. They have competing theories that are in conflict. Do you think all of their theories are right? Do you think it is a multiverse, and it is randomized, and it is photons have magical powers? Do you think all three of those answers are correct? Or, like religion, do you look at all three of them and say they're all wooey, stupid explanations, and there's got to be a better one than that? And I'm providing the better explanation. I'm giving you evolution, and here you are mocking it. Now, not because you have evidence it's wrong, not because you've shown how your theory doesn't fit the evidence. You haven't shown one indication of one thing I've said that doesn't fit the evidence, and yet you're claiming it doesn't fit the evidence. You don't see how that's just lying? Liar?
Untestable. That's the claim.
Okay, you can keep saying it, and I'll keep pointing out how it's completely testable. It passes the test. The jamming explanation passes the test. It perfectly explains the phenomenon and why it looks the way it looks. How does it fail? Point out how it doesn't fail as an explanation. Point out how this explanation doesn't work. You don't see you having that obligation before you say it failed the test? It didn't fail any test. You're a liar.
Unfalsifiable. Say it with me now. Unfalsifiable.
Right, just a word. And again, where is their dark matter falsifiable? How do I prove the non-existence of something that has no properties except it creates magical gravity? How could anybody ever falsify that claim? It's impossible. How do I falsify the claim that there's new universes created each time? Obviously, that's unfalsifiable. They have plenty of unfalsifiable theories. Conventional physics loves unfalsifiable theories. My theory is falsifiable. The simple truth is you could prove there's no electrons on the surface of the object. In some other way, maybe you could come up with some way to prove that it is purely random, but I'm just saying it's not proven. Now, they'll do things like that. There was an experiment in the 80s by Alan Aspect where they proved entanglement. But the proof is built on so many assumptions that they know what polarizing film does exactly. They know that the crystal produces two identical photons. They know all this stuff. Well, a yin and a yang photon. There's no proof that any of those assumptions are actually correct.
That's what it is. Unfalsifiability. Okay? Unfalsifiability. All right? Not... So, what?
Again, it's just a word, right? So anybody logical knows you don't defeat somebody else's theory by saying unfalsifiable. You defeat it by either presenting a better explanation, a more logical one, or you just point out how the other theory was just made up. They're just saying it. They just created an invisible man. Now, there's no invisible men in my theory, okay? It's all accountable mechanical devices, very common in our regular experience here on Earth. No momentum disappears and then reappears. The space isn't making things and then poofing them away. None of this crap that they've invented. No antiparticles, no 400 fields interacting with each other, kind of mush. None of that.
Why is it so hard for people to comprehend? I mean, that took 2 minutes. Just review the
Right. You just say unfalsifiable and you've debunked the theory. So all I have to do is say, okay, so it can't be many worlds because it's unfalsifiable. It can't be randomness because it's unfalsifiable. It can't be photons are handy capable because it's unfalsifiable. Yes, it can. Those could be correct answers. Okay, the fact that we don't have enough evidence to demonstrate decidedly one way or the other does not make the claim impossible. It just makes it where you're going to need some other kind of evidence to say, why should I believe? That's the point. And between my explanation and their explanation, I think I win big time on the why I should believe. Because my explanation is mechanically sound. Their explanation is there's a invisible squirrel inside your engine, making the wheels go round.
Goddamn video, you fucking morons. All right, bear with me here, okay? So
bear with you for what? For just slander. You're just a libeling, slandering, just make accusations for which you can't prove, you haven't demonstrated. Your whole argument is unfalsifiable. It has no evidence.
Now let's move to the next step. Okay, this next thing that we've already been over a bunch of times. It's the request for authorization without an author at all.
Authorization without an author. No, the simple argument is, this is in like contract law or anything else, that having consent, if you have something's consent to do something, you have somebody signed a consent form, I accept the liability. That means you don't have the liability anymore. You evade having to explain why you did something if somebody says, go ahead and do it. If they say, go ahead and do it, I don't have to explain anymore. I don't have to defend. I don't have to do anything. And the point is, you can't get that when you have children. You can't get consent from the person you're going to experiment on. And you will be experimenting on them. That's clear. And the simple argument, if you don't have consent, then you have to be sure you're right. Then you have to have more reason to do what you're doing, because it's all on you. You can't spread the blame somewhere else, essentially. It's all on you. You have to sit there and take full responsibility that this was somehow a good idea. And the simple argument is consent evades the problem of saying, is it a good idea? If you have consent, you evade having to explain why it is or is not a good idea, because the victim has decided to become a victim. And this fact that you don't have consent is still a fact. Even if you can't get consent, it's still a fact you don't have consent. And that's all that's being stated. And he can't figure this out. So after like 15 versions of this argument back and forth, he still hasn't figured out that there's no statement here about getting consent. The statement is you don't have it. And not having it is a factual circumstance. And because that circumstance exists, the blame is entirely on the person causing the action. Yeah, so that's enough of that. That's a separate subject. So we're just doing the physics part here. I don't know if there's other stuff to bother with. Yeah, we'll just leave it as this video, and I'll start something new the next time. Maybe attempt to provoke Baldy Cats again, the arrogant scientists. They're all arrogant. To defend some of his physics. He's always attacking other people's arguments, and yet he'll never sit there and defend his own. So I would love to get him to explain how half-silvered mirrors work. So maybe I'll work on that one. Maybe we'll just do a quick video explaining what a half-silvered mirror is and what the consequences of it are, and then he can explain how that doesn't matter. Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation if he was willing to have it. But he probably won't be. But anyway, I accept all comers. I mean, any scientist who wishes to defend the conventional nonsense, and it is a nonsense. The half-silvered mirror is already theoretically an unsuitable beam splitter, because the beams will not be equal. Alright, so, till the next time and such, I guess. Call it a video. But I mean, it's very discouraging how despicably dishonest human beings are. And they can't make they have no integrity. I mean, we don't have any evidence of a single stand-up argument against me yet, right? Even though I've gone out and I've, done everything I can, politely asked, rudely asked, shot right at people's groin, okay, with my bullets, none of them have shown up to have the fight, the duel. They've all just wimped out. They all have no courage, no integrity. This really sucks. But it's part of my win here, right? I mean, it's part of the obvious fact that I'm obviously winning, that everybody's too chicken to make any kind of argument that has anything to do with physics in it. And again, there's no physics in his argument, right? Saying unfalsifiable is not evidence of the theory being incorrect, and it's not true in the sense that my theory doesn't have unfalsifiable elements. It has 2 plus 2 plus 2 physics. It only has 2 forces, 2 kinds of matter, and 2 kinds of interaction to explain everything, to unify all of physics. Something Einstein, do you actually understand that Einstein spent his whole life looking for a unifying theory? Do you understand that? And he failed? Well, I didn't fail. Did you prove I didn't fail? No. Did you prove that I failed? All right. So, till the next time, and such.